Mogul Motivation, empowering and inspiring entrepreneurs and dream chasers worldwide, 1 week at a time. Presented by True Stories Media, and I am your host, Antoine Twiz Taylor. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Mogul Motivation. Welcome back. I'm happy that you are here. If this is your first time listening, this podcast is for the aspiring entrepreneur trying to get over that hump and make things happen. This podcast is for anybody with a dream that wants to go forward and accomplish that dream. You can subscribe to this podcast on whatever platform you're listening to it on right now, whether it be YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, etc. and more. So let's go back in time real quick. Almost 10 years ago. It was 2014. The year was 2014, and my church held a men's conference at McDonald's Hamburger University out in Oak Brook. It's not in Oak Brook anymore. It's downtown Chicago now. But nonetheless, in 2014, the McDonald's headquarters was in Oak Brook, Illinois, and that's where my church held this men's conference. And within that men's conference, there was an entrepreneur workshop that I was a part of. Now, the gentleman that was leading that workshop, he was a member of my church. And he was a millionaire. He was a millionaire, worked at a big law firm downtown Chicago. And I made the decision to go up to this man and introduce myself, tell him who I was, that I'm a young entrepreneur trying to make it big, trying to make millions, all of that, right? So I established that contact. And as a result of that contact, a relationship began. And as a result of this relationship beginning, that law firm that he worked at downtown Chicago, they're actually headquartered in the Sears Tower. He hit me up and said, "Hey, you're a photographer. We got a conference. We need a photographer for this conference. Can you do it?" I'm like, "Absolutely, I'll do it." So I did it. They paid me like $250. They paid me $250, I know, right? Millionaire law firm, they bring it in millions. But they paid me $250. And, I just wanted to be in the room. I just wanted that exposure. I just wanted to have this on my creative resume and say I did this, right? So I did it for $250. I was there for like 8 hours, right? And this conference had some big time speakers. They had former NFL players that spoke at this conference. Marshall Faulk was there. Former Bears tight end Des Clark was there. So it was definitely a good experience for a young entrepreneur, a young photographer like myself to be in that room and take photos and all of those things. And I made $250 from it. And, I was happy that I made $250, but nonetheless, I was even more happy that I was able to be in that room and, just create this intellectual property that I could say is mine, that I took these photos at this conference in the Sears Tower for this law firm. Okay. Now, I had the foresight to make sure that I got feedback from the man that I had established a relationship with. I got reviews from him to, talk about my work, the things I've done, and, my professionalism, my service. All right. So now let's go forward in time. Some years later, I've grown as an entrepreneur. I've grown as a photographer. My business sense has materialized and, I'm become more intelligent in this realm. So I'm making more money. I'm getting more gigs. I'm getting more bookings. And one of my wedding clients, some years later, did a great job once again. They love great reviews, all of those things. She recently contacted me a couple weeks ago in regards to a huge conference that her job is hosting, right, in Chicago. And she connected me with the person that's over this conference, that's, in charge with getting the logistics together for this conference. So I spoke with this contact person and they asked me how much would I charge to service this type of conference of this magnitude and all of this. And I gave her my price. And a couple weeks later, she responded. I didn't hear nothing from her for about 2 weeks, and I didn't think none of it. I thought maybe they went with somebody else, or whatever. But I learned not to force the issue, right? Sometimes what's for you is for you, and you just gotta hang back. So I hang back, and eventually, this contact person, she hit me back, and she said they wanted to move forward with me, and we spoke. And she said that she reached out to 3 different photographers, right? And of the 3 photographers, I was the most expensive by far. But she said that the decision on why they chose to go with me was because of my professionalism, the fact that I was prompt, and the fact that she had that referral from my former wedding client, right? She had that referral from my former wedding client that spoke good of me. And she said, you get what you pay for, and we trust that you can do the job regardless of the price. So now, because of all of this, I just booked one of the largest contracts I've had in my over decade of being in business and being an entrepreneur. Now that's a great thing, right? That's a shout, but the shout really isn't in the fact that I secured one of the largest contracts as an entrepreneur in 13 years. That's not the shout for me. The shout for me is everything always works out in your favor. The shout for me is really AfterPay. Now, what does AfterPay mean? AfterPay literally means, ladies and gentlemen, you have to do some things in your present that might not pay off immediately. Okay, it's not going to pay off in that moment. It ain't going to pay off next week. It ain't going to pay off next month. It might be years until it pays off. But I only got this huge contract simply because of things that happened nearly 10 years ago. So let's go back in time to the top of the episode, right? 2014, I'm at that man's conference at McDonald's University. I had the confidence to introduce myself to the guy that was leading this workshop, right? I had the confidence to introduce myself to him, to put myself out there and tell him who I am and what I'm trying to do, and I'm trying to excel and elevate in life. And as a result of me introducing myself to this man, as a result of me having confidence in this man, he chose me. He reached out to me to shoot a conference for him and his firm at the Sears Tower, where there was former NFL players there, where there were millionaires there. Now, I only got paid $250 in the moment for that conference, but nonetheless, I created that resume, I created this content and this product, and I got the reviews, and I was a professional throughout the entire process. And because of that, because I did a great job for this wedding client some years later, because of these two instances, it led directly to me securing one of the largest contracts that I have ever had entrepreneurial journey. That is how things work, ladies and gentlemen. AfterPay. Sometimes things are not going to pay off in the present, but they will pay off in the future. You see, it pays to have confidence. It pays to be resilient. It pays to always learn. It pays to be a professional. It pays to be prompt. It pays to get good reviews. It pays to do good work. It pays to provide good service at all times, no matter what the amount is. Whether it's $250 or whether it's 5 figures, it does not matter. What does matter is that you are always a good person. What does matter is you are always focused on being better. What does matter is you are always focused on doing the right thing. I secured this large contract because she said I was professional, because she said I was prompt. It didn't matter that I was the most expensive photographer that they reached out to. That's another thing that pays off too, ladies and gentlemen, knowing your worth. And your worth doesn't have a dollar amount. Understand that. But because I know what it felt like to do an 8-9 hour conference for $250, even though in that moment it wasn't worth it monetarily, it was worth it for the long game. I know what it felt like to do 8-9 hours for $250 worth of work. So I know now, as a more mature photographer, as a more mature entrepreneur, $250 is below my pay grade. I know what my worth is, even though there's no specific dollar amount tied to my worth. I know how to accurately price a certain service for a certain amount of time to where I can walk away feeling good about it now, because I'm a grown man now. I got grown man bills. I can't be doing nothing for $250. And I submit the same for you right now in your life. Whatever it may be in your life, in your entrepreneurial journey, sometimes exposure does pay. You have to discern when exposure is worth it and when exposure is not worth it. For me, that exposure was worth it in 2014 to take photos for this lawyer at this law firm in the Sears Tower. It was worth it because I knew that exposure would pay off eventually. And it took 9 years for it to pay off, but it finally paid off. And now I walked away with one of the biggest contracts in my business career. That is how exposure pays, and it all comes down to discernment. If it's something you never did, if it's an arena you ain't never been into, exposure sometimes, in most cases, can pay off. But my message on this episode this week, ladies and gentlemen, is AfterPay. Sometimes when you do things, it's not going to pay off in that moment, but it will pay off eventually. You have to believe that. You have to wholeheartedly believe that. It paid off for me to introduce myself. It paid off for me to do this work in an arena that I ain't never been in at the time. It will pay off for you eventually. It might not pay off for you in the moment, but it will pay off for you eventually. So let's continue to work. Let's continue to imagine reality. Afterpay. You might not be getting paid what you want right now, but you're going to get paid exactly what you want and more later down the line in the future. That's a fact, because I'm literally living it right now, ladies and gentlemen. So if this podcast has benefited you in any way, shape, or form, I ask for two things as always. Number one, please leave a 5-star review. And number two, pass it on to a friend that you know will benefit from it as well. Have a great day, everybody. I will talk to you next week.